After her dad, who was a secret trillionaire, died, husband divorced pregnant wife to marry Korean mistress, her father's coffin hadn't even settled into the ground when Elena Carter realized she was completely alone. The man who raised her had just died. The baby inside her kicked as if sensing fear, and her husband stood 2 feet away, scrolling through his phone. She didn't know yet that he was already gone. Elena stood beneath a gray October sky at Riverside Cemetery, just outside Cleveland, Ohio. Rain fell in cold sheets, turning the modest gathering into a blur of black umbrellas and hushed condolences. Her father, Thomas Carter, had been loved by neighbors, respected by co-workers, remembered as the maintenance supervisor who fixed things without being asked. But as the preacher spoke about humility and service, Elena felt Daniel's absence more than his presence. He was there physically, standing beside her in his tailored black suit, but his eyes kept drifting to his phone screen. Even now, even here, she was 5 months pregnant, her body heavy with grief and new life, and the man who promised to stand by her was somewhere else entirely. 2 days later, while Elena still wore funeral black, her husband asked for a divorce. Not because of anger, not because of a fight, but because he had found something lighter, something easier, something he thought was better. They sat at the kitchen table, the same scarred oak table where her father had once helped her with algebra homework, where he'd taught her to balance a checkbook, where he'd held her hand the night her mother died of cancer when Elena was only 12, and "I think we should separate," Daniel said, his voice calm, almost clinical. Elena's world tilted. She thought she'd misheard him. "I'm pregnant," she whispered, instinctively placing a hand on her stomach. Daniel exhaled, a sound laced with irritation rather than sorrow. "That's part of the problem. Everything feels heavy. Your dad's illness, the baby, the constant sadness. I need a fresh start, Elena. We both do." Fresh start. The words hung in the air like poison. What he didn't know was that the quiet man they buried, the one who worked long hours and lived modestly in a small house near Shaker Heights, had spent decades hiding a truth so massive it would one day shatter everything Daniel believed about power, success, and worth. What he didn't know was that he had just walked away from a woman whose name would soon echo in rooms he would never enter again. Rooms filled with people who understood one thing too late. The most dangerous woman in the room is the one you thought was powerless. Stay with me, because this isn't a story about money. It's about timing, and how some men leave right before the miracle, and spend the rest of their lives realizing it. The grief hit Elena in waves. Some days she could almost pretend her father was still alive, just away on one of his weekend trips to help a neighbor repair a furnace or reshingle a roof. Other days the absence crushed her so completely she couldn't leave bed. The funeral had been small. Thomas Carter hadn't wanted anything grand. The service at Riverside Cemetery drew maybe 40 people, colleagues from the maintenance company, neighbors from the quiet Cleveland suburb where they'd lived for 20 years, a few members from the community center where Thomas volunteered on weekends. Elena remembered standing at the graveside, her hand resting on her swollen belly, feeling the baby move. She'd whispered to her father in her mind, "You would have loved this child so much." Daniel had arrived late, slipping into the back row during the eulogy. When she'd looked back at him, hoping for eye contact, for connection, for anything, he'd been staring at his phone, his jaw tight, his mind clearly elsewhere. After the service, people had approached her with the usual offerings, casseroles, condolences, promises to check in. Mrs. Kowalski from next door had gripped her hand tightly. "Your daddy was a good man, Elena. Best man I ever knew." Elena had nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Daniel had skipped the gathering at the house afterward. "Work emergency," he'd said, kissing her forehead without meeting her eyes. "I'll catch up with you later." He hadn't. That night, Elena sat alone in her childhood home, surrounded by her father's things. His reading glasses on the side table, his worn work boots by the door, the faint smell of Old Spice still clinging to his favorite armchair. She'd cried until there were no tears left. The next morning, she'd forced herself to start sorting through his belongings. The house wasn't large, a modest 2-bedroom with creaky floors and windows that rattled in winter. But every corner held memories. In the kitchen she found the jar where her father kept spare change. In the hallway closet his collection of flannel shirts, each one soft from years of washing. In his bedroom photos of her mother, beautiful, smiling, gone too soon. Elena had expected grief. She'd prepared for it. What she hadn't prepared for was the loneliness. Daniel came home that evening smelling of expensive cologne. He barely acknowledged her, heading straight for the shower. When he emerged, he poured himself a drink and sat on the opposite end of the couch, his body language closed off. "How are you holding up?" he asked, but his tone suggested he didn't really want to know. "I'm managing," Elena said quietly. "It's hard, but I'm managing." Daniel nodded, already looking at his phone again. Elena studied her husband. This man she'd married 3 years ago in a small ceremony at Cleveland's Botanical Gardens. He'd been charming then, attentive, ambitious in a way that felt exciting rather than threatening. He worked in corporate consulting, traveling frequently, always chasing the next big client. She'd met him through a friend, and he'd pursued her with the kind of confidence that made her feel seen. After years of caring for her ailing father, Daniel had felt like possibility, like the future. Now, sitting across from him in the dim living room, Elena realized she didn't recognize him anymore. "I'm going to bed," she said, standing slowly, one hand supporting her lower back. Daniel didn't look up. "I'll be up in a bit." He wasn't. Elena lay awake that night, her father's death pressing down on her chest like a physical weight. She thought about all the times Thomas had been there for her. Every scraped knee, every broken heart, every moment when she'd needed someone and he'd appeared without hesitation. And now he was gone. The baby kicked, a sharp jab against her ribs, and Elena placed both hands on her belly. "It's just us now," she whispered into the darkness. "Just us." She had no idea how wrong she was, or how alone she was about to become. Daniel waited exactly 48 hours after the funeral before delivering the news. Elena had spent the morning organizing her father's paperwork, bills, insurance documents, the deed to the house. She'd found comfort in the routine, in having something concrete to focus on. Around noon, she'd made lunch, a simple sandwich she barely touched, and was about to return to her father's study when Daniel walked in. He looked different, nervous but also determined, like a man who'd made a decision and was committed to seeing it through. "We need to talk," he said. Elena's stomach dropped. Nothing good ever followed those words. They sat at the kitchen table. Daniel folded his hands in front of him, adopting the same posture he used during difficult client meetings. Professional, detached, efficient. "I think we should separate," he said. The words didn't register at first. Elena blinked, waiting for him to laugh, to say he was joking, to explain that grief was making him say crazy things. He didn't. "What?" she managed. "This isn't working anymore," Daniel continued, his voice maddeningly calm. "It hasn't been working for a while. I've been trying to hold on. But with everything that's happened, your dad, the pregnancy, I just can't do it anymore. Elena felt the room tilt. You can't do what anymore? This, Daniel said, gesturing vaguely between them. Us. The weight of it all. I need something different, Elena. Something lighter. Lighter. The word landed like a slap. I'm pregnant, Elena said, her voice barely above a whisper. We're having a baby in 4 months. Daniel's jaw tightened. I know. And I've thought about that. But bringing a child into a broken marriage isn't fair to anyone. We should separate now, cleanly, before things get worse. Elena stared at him, searching for any trace of the man she'd married. The man who'd promised to stand by her. The man who'd held her hand when she'd told him about the pregnancy and said he was ready to be a father. Is there someone else? The question tumbled out before she could stop it. Daniel hesitated, just a fraction of a second, but Elena caught it. That's not what this is about, he said. But his pause had already answered her question. Elena stood, her chair scraping against the floor. Get out. Elena. Get out of my father's house. Daniel stood too, his expression hardening. Actually, this is our house now, joint property. We'll need to discuss what happens with it. The cruelty of that statement, the casualness with which he reduced her father's home to a line item in a divorce settlement, broke something inside Elena. You waited, she said, her voice shaking. You waited until my father was dead to do this. Daniel had the decency to look uncomfortable. That's not... Yes, it is. You knew he would have fought for me, protected me, so you waited until he was gone. This isn't about your father. Everything is about my father, Elena shouted, surprising herself. He raised me alone. He worked 2 jobs to put me through college. He was there for every single moment of my life, and you couldn't even pretend to care at his funeral. Daniel's expression shifted from discomfort to defensiveness. I was there. Your body was there. You weren't. Silence filled the kitchen. Outside, a car passed by, its headlights briefly illuminating the walls. Daniel grabbed his jacket from the back of his chair. I'll have my lawyer contact you. You already have a lawyer? He paused at the door. I'll send someone for my things tomorrow. Then he was gone. Elena stood alone in the kitchen, her father's kitchen, and felt the last thread of her old life snap. That evening, numb and hollow, she made the mistake of opening social media. She'd been avoiding it since the funeral, unable to face the stream of sorry for your loss messages from people she barely knew. But something compelled her to look. Daniel's profile loaded. His most recent post was from 6 hours ago. A photo of him standing in front of the Los Angeles skyline, golden hour light making everything look warm and perfect. And beside him, smiling brilliantly in a designer dress, was a woman Elena had met exactly once, at a corporate dinner 2 months ago. Yura Kim. Daniel had introduced her as a client from the West Coast office. The caption read, New Beginnings. The comments were full of congratulations, heart emojis, people wishing them well. Elena scrolled through Yura's profile with shaking hands. Photos of upscale restaurants, luxury hotels, private planes, and sprinkled throughout recent weeks. Daniel. At a rooftop bar in Santa Monica. At a gallery opening in Beverly Hills. At a beach in Malibu. While Elena had been caring for her dying father, Daniel had been building a new life. She closed the app and sat in the darkness of her father's living room, one hand on her belly, feeling her baby move. And for the first time since the funeral, Elena cried. not from grief, but from rage. Daniel moved out within 3 days. He came while Elena was at her doctor's appointment, sending movers to collect his belongings. When she returned home, his side of the closet was empty, his toiletries gone from the bathroom, his presence erased as efficiently as if he'd never existed. He'd left the divorce papers on the kitchen table. Elena didn't read them. Not yet. She couldn't. Instead, she did what any woman in her position would do. She researched. Yura Kim wasn't just any client. She was the director of international partnerships at Meridian Consulting Group, the same firm where Daniel worked. She had an MBA from Stanford, spoke 4 languages, and had been featured in Forbes' 30 Under 30 list 3 years ago. She was polished, accomplished, connected. Everything Elena, a children's librarian from Cleveland, was not. The social media posts continued. Daniel and Yura at a charity gala in Los Angeles. Daniel and Yura hiking in Runyon Canyon. Daniel and Yura at an exclusive restaurant in West Hollywood, his arm around her waist, both of them laughing at something off-camera. Elena recognized that laugh. She used to be the one who made him laugh like that. The comments on their posts were effusive. Beautiful couple. You two are perfect together. So happy for you. No one mentioned that Daniel's pregnant wife was alone in Cleveland, processing the death of her father while he played house with someone new. Elena's friend Rebecca came over with groceries and found her on the couch, phone in hand, tears streaming down her face. "What are you doing?" Rebecca asked, gently taking the phone away. "Torturing myself," Elena admitted. Rebecca looked at the screen, and her expression hardened. "This woman knows about you, right? She knows he's married?" "I don't know. Maybe she thinks we were already separated." "That's generous of you. What else am I supposed to think?" Rebecca sat beside her, setting the phone aside. "You're supposed to think that your husband is a coward who abandoned his pregnant wife days after her father died, and this woman is either complicit or naive. Either way, they're not your problem anymore." But they felt like Elena's problem. Every photo was a reminder of what she'd lost. Not just Daniel, but the future she'd imagined. The family she'd thought they'd build. The partnership she'd believed in. 2 weeks after Daniel left, Elena received a text from an unknown number. "Hi, Elena. This is Yura. I think we should talk." Elena stared at the message for a full minute before responding. "About what?" The reply came quickly. "About moving forward. I know this is difficult, but Daniel and I want to handle this maturely." Maturely. Elena felt something dark and ugly rise in her chest. "He left me while I was pregnant. 2 days after my father died. What part of that is mature?" 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. "I understand you're hurt, but Daniel and I have something real. I hope you can respect that." Elena almost threw her phone across the room. Instead, she typed, "I hope it was worth it." Then she blocked the number. That night, Elena lay in bed, her father's bed, because she couldn't bear to sleep in the room she'd shared with Daniel, and made a decision. She wasn't going to fight. She wasn't going to beg. She wasn't going to make Daniel regret his choice or prove to Yura that she'd made a mistake. She was simply going to let them go, not because she was weak, but because she had something more important to focus on, the life growing inside her. And somewhere, buried in the paperwork she still hadn't finished sorting, her father had left her something. She didn't know what yet, but she would find out. The lawyer's name was Marcus Donovan, and he called Elena on a Tuesday morning 3 weeks after the funeral. "Mrs. Carter, my name is Marcus Donovan from Whitmore and Associates in Chicago. I was your father's attorney. I apologize for not reaching out sooner, but I wanted to give you time to grieve. However, there are matters we need to discuss regarding your father's estate." Elena, standing in her father's kitchen making tea, frowned. Estate. My father didn't have much, just the house and maybe a small savings account. There was a pause on the line. Mrs. Carter, I think we should meet in person. Are you available to come to Chicago this week? Chicago? I don't understand. Can't we handle this over the phone? I'm afraid not. This is sensitive, and it requires your physical presence for authentication and security purposes. Something in his tone made Elena's pulse quicken. What's this about? Your father's trust, and his instructions for you. 2 days later, Elena found herself on a train to Chicago, her hands resting on her growing belly, watching Ohio farmland blur past the window. Marcus Donovan's office was in a gleaming tower on Michigan Avenue, the kind of building Elena had only seen in movies. The reception area had marble floors and art that probably cost more than her father's house. A receptionist led her to a conference room where Marcus Donovan waited, a man in his 60s with kind eyes and an expensive suit. Mrs. Carter, thank you for coming. He shook her hand gently, noting her pregnancy. Please, sit. Can I get you anything? Water? Tea? I'm fine. I just want to understand what's going on. Marcus opened a leather folder. Your father came to me 15 years ago. He established an irrevocable trust and left explicit instructions that you were not to be informed of its existence until after his death. Eleanor's confusion deepened. Why? Because your father wanted you to live a normal life. He wanted you to develop your own identity, make your own choices, find your own path, without the burden or influence of wealth. Wealth. My father was a maintenance supervisor. Marcus smiled gently. No, Mrs. Carter. Your father was Thomas Carter III, founder and majority shareholder of Carter Industrial Solutions. He sold the company in 1995 for $847 million. The room tilted. Elena gripped the edge of the table. That's not possible. Marcus slid a document across the table. This is your father's birth certificate, corporate records, and the trust documentation. Everything is legitimate and verified. Elena stared at the papers, her vision blurring. Why would he live the way he did? The small house? The maintenance job? Your mother, Marcus said softly. When she became ill, your father made a promise to her. He would raise you without the complications of wealth. He would teach you the value of hard work, integrity, and genuine human connection. He believed that money corrupted people, and he wanted you to become someone strong enough to handle it when the time came. Elena's mind reeled. She thought of her father's calloused hands, his old truck, his weekend repairs for neighbors, all of it real, all of it chosen. After your mother died, Marcus continued, Thomas threw himself into being the father she wanted him to be. He worked the maintenance job because he genuinely enjoyed it, helping people, fixing things, being useful. But he never touched the trust principle. He lived entirely on his modest salary. Where's the money now? Marcus pulled out another document. The trust is worth approximately $1.3 billion. It's been growing for 25 years, and as of your father's death, it transfers entirely to you. Elena couldn't breathe. $1.3 billion. She thought of Daniel, of his confidence, his ambition, his corporate success that he'd lorded over her. She thought of Eurokim's designer dresses and Stanford MBA. She thought of how small they'd made her feel. Marcus continued, There are conditions, of course. Your father was very specific. The trust includes provisions for education, philanthropy, and ensuring the money is used responsibly. But the core truth is this. You are now one of the wealthiest women in America. Elena looked up, tears streaming down her face. Did he know? About Daniel leaving? Marcus's expression softened. Your father was very ill in his final months, but he was clear-minded. He told me that if your marriage failed, and he suspected it might, you would need to be strong. He said, "My daughter doesn't need someone to save her. She needs to save herself." Elena covered her mouth with her hand, sobbing. "There's more," Marcus said gently. He pulled out an envelope. "Your father left you a letter." Elena took it with shaking hands. The handwriting was unmistakably her father's. Strong, clear, deliberate. "My dearest Elena, if you're reading this, I'm gone. And I'm sorry I couldn't tell you everything while I was alive, but I needed you to become who you are without the weight of wealth on your shoulders. You are stronger than you know, kinder than you believe, and more capable than you've ever allowed yourself to imagine. Whatever happened with Daniel, and I suspected things weren't right, isn't a reflection of your worth. Some men can't see what's valuable until it's gone. That's his loss, not yours. Use this money wisely. Help people. Build something meaningful. And most importantly, raise my grandchild to understand that true wealth isn't in the bank. It's in character. I'm proud of you, sweetheart. I always have been. Love, Dad." Elena clutched the letter to her chest and wept. Marcus Donovan waited patiently while Elena composed herself. When she finally looked up, her eyes were red but clear. "Daniel doesn't know about any of this." "No, and he can't touch it," Marcus said firmly. "Your father was extremely thorough. The trust is irrevocable and was established long before your marriage. Under both federal and Ohio state law, it's classified as separate property, not marital assets." "What about the divorce?" "The divorce concerns only marital property, the house you shared, any joint accounts, shared debts. The trust is completely protected. Daniel would have to prove he somehow contributed to its growth during your marriage, which is impossible since neither of you knew it existed." Elena absorbed this, her legal training from years of library work with patrons suddenly feeling useful. "So even if he found out, he has no claim. Zero. Your father structured it that way deliberately. He included what's called a spendthrift clause, which prevents creditors or ex-spouses from accessing the funds. He also added a discretionary provision that gives the trustee, which is now you, complete control over distributions." "What about the baby?" Marcus smiled. "Your father included provisions for any grandchildren. When your child turns 25, they'll receive their own distribution. Until then, you have discretionary authority to use trust funds for their care, education, and well-being." Elena felt something shift inside her. The fear that had consumed her for weeks. Fear of raising a child alone, of financial instability, of proving Daniel right about her being too weak, began to dissolve. "There's something else you should know," Marcus continued. "Your father left instructions that his identity remain private for as long as you wish. The maintenance supervisor story doesn't have to change. You can continue living quietly if you choose, or you can step into a more public role. It's entirely your decision." "Why would I want to stay quiet?" "Because once people know who you are and what you're worth, everything changes. Relationships become transactional. People treat you differently. Your father wanted you to have the choice, to reveal yourself on your own terms, when you were ready." Elena thought about this. About Daniel and Yura living their glamorous life in Los Angeles, posting photos, collecting admiring comments, building what they thought was success. They had no idea what real power looked like. "I need time to think," Elena said. "Of course. I'm here whenever you're ready. In the meantime, I've taken the liberty of arranging for immediate financial support." You'll have access to a monthly distribution that should cover all your expenses comfortably. And I'll have my office handle the divorce proceedings to ensure Daniel's attorneys don't overstep. Elena frowned. I haven't told you his name. Marcus's smile was knowing. I'm very good at my job, Mrs. Carter. Your father hired me because I'm thorough. Elena left the office in a daze. She walked along Michigan Avenue, the Chicago skyline glittering in the afternoon sun, and tried to process everything. Her father, the man who'd taught her to change a tire, who'd worn the same jacket for 15 years, who'd clipped coupons and shopped at discount stores, had been a billionaire, and he'd protected her, not just with money, but with wisdom. He'd known that wealth revealed character, and he'd wanted her to build her character first, without the corrupting influence of easy money. Elena stopped at Millennium Park and sat on a bench near Cloud Gate, watching tourists take selfies with the massive reflective sculpture. She placed both hands on her belly, feeling her baby move. Your grandfather was extraordinary, she whispered, and he made sure we'd be okay. For the first time since her father's death, Elena felt something other than grief. She felt purpose. That evening back in Cleveland, Elena signed the divorce papers without protest. Daniel's lawyer had been surprised by her compliance. Mrs. Carter, you should know that you're entitled to— I don't want anything from him, Elena said calmly. He can have the house. I'll take my personal belongings and my father's things. That's all. The lawyer blinked. That's very generous. I'm not being generous. I'm being done. She signed every page without reading the details, her signature strong and clear. Let Daniel think he'd won. Let him believe she was too broken, too grieving, too pregnant to fight. The truth would reveal itself in time. And when it did, Elena wanted to make sure she was ready. The divorce was finalized in 6 weeks. Daniel got the house in Shaker Heights, the modest 2-bedroom that Elena had shared with her father. He got the furniture, the joint bank account with its $3,400 balance, and the 2015 Honda Accord they'd bought together. Elena got her father's old pickup truck, his personal belongings, and her freedom. Daniel's lawyer called it an amicable settlement. Elena called it strategic. She moved into a small rental in Cleveland Heights, a quiet apartment with hardwood floors and large windows that let in good light. It wasn't much, but it was hers. She filled it with her father's favorite chair, his books, his photographs. And she began to plan. Marcus Donovan had introduced her to a team of advisors, financial planners, investment managers, legal specialists. They met monthly in Chicago, helping Elena understand the magnitude of her inheritance and how to manage it responsibly. Most people who come into sudden wealth make the same mistake, said Patricia Moss, the financial advisor. They either spend recklessly or freeze completely. Your father's trust gives you a unique advantage, time to learn, time to grow, time to become comfortable with your new reality. Elena was 7 months pregnant now, her body heavy and tired, but her mind sharper than it had ever been. She read voraciously, books on wealth management, philanthropic strategy, corporate governance. She studied her father's original company, understanding what he'd built and why he'd succeeded. And she began to form a vision, not revenge, something bigger. I want to start a foundation, she told Marcus during one of their meetings. Something focused on single parents, particularly those dealing with sudden loss. Emergency funds, legal support, counseling services. Marcus nodded approvingly. Your father would have loved that. I also want to invest in education, scholarships for working-class students, programs that teach financial literacy. We can absolutely structure that through the trust. Elena paused, choosing her next words carefully. And I want to do it quietly. No press releases, no public announcements. Not yet. May I ask why? Elena thought of Daniel and Yura, still posting their perfect life online. She thought of how Daniel had looked at her with pity when he'd asked for the divorce, as if she was something to be discarded. Because timing matters, she said simply. Daniel and Yura had gotten engaged. Elena found out through social media, of course. Yura's Instagram post showed a massive diamond ring, easily 4 carats, with the Los Angeles sunset glowing behind them. The caption read, "He said yes." The comments were predictable. "Congratulations, you two are perfect, dream couple." Elena studied the photo with clinical detachment. Daniel looked happy. Genuinely happy in a way she couldn't remember seeing in their last year of marriage. Maybe he really did love Yura. Maybe they really were better suited. Or maybe the relationship was built on the same shallow foundation as their Instagram feed. All aesthetics, no substance. Elena didn't care anymore. She was 32 weeks pregnant, attending childbirth classes alone, setting up a nursery in her small apartment, preparing for a future that looked nothing like what she'd imagined. And she was okay with that. "You seem different," Rebecca observed one afternoon while helping Elena assemble a crib. "Calmer." "I am." "It's creepy. You should be falling apart." Elena smiled. "I did fall apart. Now I'm putting myself back together. Differently." Rebecca studied her friend. "There's something you're not telling me." Elena met her gaze. "There is, but I will, when the time is right." "That's extremely mysterious." "Good." The truth was, Elena had made peace with Daniel leaving, not because he deserved forgiveness, but because his departure had freed her. If he'd stayed, if he'd been supportive during her father's illness, if he'd been present during the funeral, if he'd held her hand through the grief, she would have shared the inheritance with him. She would have built a life that included him. Instead, he'd chosen to leave at the exact moment when everything was about to change. And that timing, that terrible, selfish timing, had ensured he would get exactly nothing. Elena rubbed her belly, feeling her daughter kick. She'd learned the gender at her 20-week ultrasound, crying tears of joy when the technician had said, "It's a girl." "Your dad thought he was walking away from weakness," Elena whispered. "He has no idea what he's actually walking away from." On a cold December evening, 3 weeks before her due date, Elena received a text from Daniel. "I heard you sign the papers without a lawyer. That was smart. Clean break is better for everyone. I hope you're doing okay." Elena stared at the message, at the casual condescension in every word. She typed and deleted several responses before settling on, "I'm doing better than okay." His reply came quickly. "Good, I'm glad. For what it's worth, I think this was the right decision." "For both of us," Elena typed. She blocked his number after that. There was nothing left to say. Elena Grace Carter was born on January 15th at Metro Health Medical Center in Cleveland. 7 pounds, 4 ounces, dark hair like her mother, strong grip like her grandfather. Elena held her daughter in the hospital room, alone except for the nurses and Rebecca, who'd driven her to the hospital when contractions started. "She's perfect," Rebecca whispered, tears streaming down her face. "She is," Elena agreed. There were no calls from Daniel, no flowers, no acknowledgement that his daughter had been born. Elena didn't expect any. But as she looked down at her baby girl, she made a silent promise. "You will never question your worth. You will never doubt your value. And you will understand that true power isn't about money. It's about knowing exactly who you are." The first 6 weeks of motherhood were exactly as hard as everyone warned. Sleepless nights, endless feedings, the physical recovery that no one really talks about. Elena navigated it all alone, grateful for Rebecca's help, but understanding that ultimately this was her journey. And somehow, through the exhaustion and chaos, she felt stronger than ever. By March, Elena had found her rhythm. Grace was sleeping in longer stretches. Elena's body was healing, and her mind was ready to focus on the next phase. She called Marcus Donovan. "I'm ready," she said. "Ready for what?" "To step into who I'm supposed to be." The transformation happened gradually. First, Elena established the Carter Foundation, a non-profit focused on supporting single parents facing sudden hardship. She funded it generously but quietly, hiring a small team of professionals to run day-to-day operations. Second, she began investing strategically, not for profit alone, but for impact. She backed companies led by women, funded educational programs, supported initiatives that aligned with her values. Third, she started learning from the best. She hired executive coaches, attended leadership seminars, connected with other philanthropists who shared her vision of wealth as responsibility rather than status. By Grace's first birthday, Elena had moved to New York City. The decision surprised everyone who knew her. Cleveland was home. Cleveland was familiar and safe. But New York was where things happened. Elena rented a beautiful apartment in Tribeca, hired a wonderful nanny named Margaret, and began building a network of connections that would have been impossible in Ohio. She attended charity galas not as a spectator, but as a donor. She joined boards of organizations focused on education and economic mobility. She gave speeches, quietly at first, then with growing confidence, about wealth inequality and the responsibility of inherited fortune. And she did it all while raising Grace, who was growing into a confident, curious little girl who loved books and asked endless questions. "Mama, why do we help people?" Grace asked one evening during bedtime. "Because your grandfather taught me that having more than you need means you have enough to share." Did Grandpa have a lot? He had everything that mattered. Elena never posted on social media, never sought publicity, never announced her wealth or her foundation or her growing influence. But in the circles that mattered, philanthropy, education, social impact, her name began to carry weight. People sought her advice. Organizations requested her support. Invitations arrived for exclusive events. And through it all, Elena maintained her father's principle: character before credit. She dressed well but not ostentatiously. She lived comfortably but not extravagantly. She raised Grace to understand privilege as responsibility, not entitlement. And she waited. By Grace's second birthday, Elena received an invitation that changed everything. The Anderson Foundation Gala in Manhattan, one of the most prestigious charitable events in the country. 500 guests, invitation only. The kind of event where the guest list read like a who's who of American wealth and power. Elena accepted. And in doing so, she set in motion a reckoning 3 years in the making. Because Daniel Carter and Ura Kim would be there too. Daniel had leveraged Ura's connections to climb higher in the consulting world. They were now based in Manhattan, living in a luxury condo in Hudson Yards, very much part of the social scene Elena was quietly entering. Elena had known their paths would cross eventually. She'd prepared for this moment, and when it came, she would be ready. The Anderson Foundation Gala was held at Cipriani 42nd Street, a venue that reeked of old money and new wealth trying to look old. Elena arrived alone, wearing a midnight blue gown that was elegant without being flashy. Her hair was swept up, her jewelry minimal, a simple pearl necklace that had belonged to her mother. She looked exactly like what she was, a woman comfortable in her power. The ballroom was spectacular. Crystal chandeliers, silk drapery, tables set with gold flatware. A jazz quartet played softly while guests mingled, drinks in hand, laughing the practiced laugh of people used to these events. Elena moved through the crowd with quiet confidence, greeting people she'd met through her foundation work, exchanging pleasantries with donors and board members. And then she saw them. Daniel and Yura stood near the bar, both dressed impeccably. Daniel in a custom tuxedo. Yura in a scarlet-red dress that probably cost more than Elena's first car. They looked successful, connected, like they belonged. Elena watched as they worked the room, Daniel's hand possessively on Yura's waist, both of them networking with practiced ease. She waited. The program began with dinner, a 4-course meal that Elena barely touched. She sat at a prominent table, surrounded by foundation directors and major donors, contributing to conversations about educational equity and economic mobility with the kind of informed perspective that came from genuine study. "You're Thomas Carter's daughter," said the woman to her left. "Margaret Anderson, matriarch of the Anderson family and tonight's hostess." Eleanor smiled. "I am." "Your father was extraordinary. We served on a board together in the 90s before he disappeared into private life. One of the most brilliant minds in industry." "Thank you. He was also the best father I could have asked for." Margaret studied her. "I've been following your foundation's work. Very impressive. You have his strategic mind." "I hope so." After dinner came the program. Speeches from various foundation leaders, a video presentation about the year's impact, and then the announcement that made Elena's pulse quicken. "And now," Margaret Anderson said from the podium, "I'd like to introduce someone special. She's been doing extraordinary work behind the scenes, funding initiatives that support single parents, educational access, and economic mobility. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Elena Carter, founder of the Carter Foundation." The spotlight found Elena. She stood gracefully, aware of hundreds of eyes turning toward her, and walked to the stage. From her position at the podium, she could see the entire room, and she could see Daniel's face the moment recognition hit. His expression shifted from polite interest to confusion to something close to shock. Yura leaned over, whispering something. Daniel shook his head, still staring. Elena began her speech. "Thank you, Margaret. When my father passed away 3 years ago, I learned something important about wealth, not how to have it, but why to have it. My father, Thomas Carter, was the founder of Carter Industrial Solutions. He sold his company for nearly $1 billion, then chose to spend the rest of his life working as a maintenance supervisor, living modestly, and teaching me that true wealth isn't measured in bank accounts. It's measured in character." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Elena continued, her voice steady. "I didn't know about my inheritance until after he died. He wanted me to build my own identity first, to understand the value of work and struggle and resilience. And I'm grateful for that gift, because when I did inherit his fortune, I understood what it was meant for. Not luxury, not status, but purpose." She paused, letting her gaze sweep the room, landing briefly on Daniel. His face was ashen. "The Carter Foundation supports single parents facing sudden hardship, particularly those dealing with loss, divorce, or unexpected life changes. We provide emergency funds, legal support, counseling, and job training. Because I understand what it feels like to be dismissed, to be underestimated, to be told you're not enough." Elena's voice grew stronger. "And I'm here tonight to tell you that the measure of a person isn't their circumstances. It's their response to those circumstances. Thank you." The applause was thunderous. Elena returned to her seat, her heart pounding, aware that she'd just publicly revealed something she'd kept hidden for 3 years. And across the room, Daniel looked like he might be sick. After the program, people swarmed Elena, donors wanting to connect. Foundation leaders seeking partnerships, journalists asking for interviews. And through the crowd, Elena saw Daniel pushing toward her, Yura trailing behind him, her face tight with confusion and something that looked like anger. Elena excused herself from a conversation with a non-profit director and turned to face her ex-husband. "Elena," Daniel said, his voice strained, "I had no idea. Your father was a billionaire." Elena finished calmly. "Yes, he was. Why didn't you tell me?" The question hung between them, absurd in its audacity. Elena smiled. Not warmly, but not cruelly either. "Because I didn't know until after he died, which was 2 days before you asked me for a divorce." Yura stepped forward, her composure cracking. "You let him give you everything in the settlement. You acted like you had nothing." "I didn't want anything Daniel could give me," Elena said evenly. "I already had everything I needed." Daniel's mind was clearly racing, calculating, trying to understand how this had happened. "The house, which you sold for a profit last year. The divorce was entirely legal. I signed away marital property, which didn't include my trust. My lawyers made sure of that." Daniel's face flushed. "You manipulated the settlement." "No," Elena said, her voice like steel. "I accepted exactly what you thought I deserved, which was nothing. You made that calculation yourself." Yura grabbed Daniel's arm. "We should go." But Daniel couldn't move, couldn't stop staring at Elena as if seeing her for the first time. "I was pregnant," Elena said quietly. "Grieving. And you left because things felt too heavy. You wanted something lighter. Well, you got it. I hope it was worth it." "Elena, congratulations on your engagement, by the way. I saw the announcement." Yura's face went red. Elena turned away, done with the conversation, done with them both. As she walked back into the crowd, she heard Daniel calling her name. She didn't turn around. 6 months after the gala, Elena sat in her Tribeca apartment, watching Grace play with building blocks on the living room floor. Her daughter was 2.5 now, talking in full sentences, asking questions about everything, showing the same curiosity Thomas Carter had embodied. "Mama, why is the sky blue?" Grace asked, holding up a blue block. "Because of the way sunlight moves through the atmosphere," Elena explained. "The blue light bounces around more than other colors." "Oh." Grace considered this seriously, then went back to building. Elena's phone buzzed. A message from Marcus Donovan. "Foundation board meeting confirmed for Thursday. Also, Forbes wants to profile you for their philanthropy issue." Elena typed back. "Decline the Forbes profile. Accept invitations for the financial literacy panel next month." She'd learned to be selective about publicity. Her work spoke for itself. The Carter Foundation had grown significantly. They'd helped over 2,000 single parents in 3 years, funded scholarship programs for working-class students, established partnerships with organizations doing meaningful work. And Elena had done it all while raising Grace, who was growing up understanding that privilege came with responsibility. "Tell me about Grandpa," Grace said, abandoning her blocks to climb into Elena's lap. Elena wrapped her arms around her daughter. "Your grandpa was the kindest man I ever knew. He worked hard, helped people, and taught me that being good is more important than looking successful." "Was he rich?" "In all the ways that mattered, yes." "Did he meet me?" This question always hurt. "No, sweetheart. He died before you were born. But he knew about you, and he loved you already. Grace nodded solemnly, accepting this. What about my daddy? Elena had prepared for this question, knowing it would come eventually. Your daddy lives in New York too, she said carefully. He made different choices, and that's okay. You and I are a team. We have everything we need. Okay, Grace said simply, satisfied with this answer in the way only small children could be. Elena had seen Daniel only once since the gala, a chance encounter in Central Park. He'd been alone, walking with his head down, looking smaller somehow than she remembered. He'd stopped when he saw her and Grace. Is that... he'd started. Yes, Elena had said. This is Grace. Daniel had stared at his daughter, this little person he'd never met, never asked about, never supported, with an expression Elena couldn't quite read. Regret? Longing? Shame? She's beautiful, he'd said quietly. She is. Elena, Don't, Elena had interrupted gently. Whatever you're about to say, don't. It won't change anything. I made a mistake. You made a choice. There's a difference. Daniel had looked at her then, really looked at her, seeing perhaps for the first time the woman he'd dismissed. You're doing well. I'm doing what my father taught me to do, building something meaningful. And Yura and I... He'd stopped, uncomfortable. That's not my business anymore. Elena had heard through the social network that Daniel and Yura's relationship had fractured after the gala. The revelation of Elena's wealth had apparently caused significant tension. Yura had felt deceived. Daniel had felt cheated. The engagement had been quietly called off. Whether they'd stayed together or separated, Elena didn't know and didn't care. Her life had moved beyond them. Now, holding Grace in her apartment as afternoon light streamed through the windows, Elena felt something she hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not because she'd won something, but because she'd built something. The doorbell rang. Rebecca, visiting from Cleveland with her new fiancé. Auntie Becca! Grace shrieked, running to the door. Elena opened it, hugging her best friend. You made it. Wouldn't miss it. Besides, I need to see this fancy life you're living. They spent the afternoon together, Rebecca, her fiancé, Elena and Grace, eating lunch, talking, laughing. Normal things, good things. As the sun set over Manhattan, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Rebecca pulled Elena aside. Are you happy? She asked. Elena considered the question seriously. Yes, not in the way I planned to be. But yes, your dad would be proud. I hope so. That night, after Grace was asleep and the apartment was quiet, Elena sat at her father's old desk, the one piece of furniture she'd kept from his house in Cleveland. She pulled out the letter he'd written her, now worn from being read and reread. True wealth isn't in the bank, it's in character. Elena folded the letter carefully and placed it back in its envelope. Then she opened her laptop and began drafting the next phase of the Foundation's work, a program focused on teaching financial literacy to teenagers in underserved communities. Because her father had been right, money didn't make you powerful. Knowing exactly who you were made you powerful. And Elena Carter, daughter of Thomas Carter, mother of Grace, founder of a foundation changing lives, knew exactly who she was. She was the woman who'd lost everything and discovered she had never needed saving. She was the woman who'd been dismissed and became unforgettable, She was the woman who understood that the best revenge wasn't proving someone wrong. It was building something so meaningful that their opinion became irrelevant. And as Manhattan sparkled outside her window, Elena smiled. Because some men leave right before the miracle and spend the rest of their lives realizing what they lost. But the women they leave behind, they become miracles themselves.